Today, we get to sit down with property mogul Ayda Shabanz. She may be the managing director of several multi-million-dollar property and finance companies across Australia and Asia, the founder of the Grow Group, and all the while holding down the fort as director of Newstead Realty. And yet, life's trajectory wasn't necessarily tracking for that level of success. Don't be fooled when you see her glamorous features in the Australian Financial Review, Yahoo Finance, Domain, Australian Property Investor, or Sky News, because having a property portfolio of over 10 million by the age of 30 was completely and utterly self-made. Nothing has come easy for this woman. Born in Iran, the country's turmoil had her fractured family fleeing when she was just 4. Only to land in Australia and have her parents divorce and many unsafe adults move into her home. Multiple traumatic experiences led her to leave home at only 14 and brave the world on her own. No one was coming to save her, so she saved herself. She grabbed her entrepreneurial spirit and sense of survival and worked her butt off to support herself. Through many challenging business knocks, she grew tougher and stronger and was unstoppable the moment she realized there was no cap on her earning potential. Constantly upskilling herself and learning and earning a diploma in advanced business and project management marketing, while keeping her real estate and Australian credit license active, she never sits still. After creating the Grow Group, a podcast was her logical next step, a way to show and share the way. Unbridled, no nonsense, cut to the chase kind of advice that she hopes will inspire Gen Ys to go out there and invest and buy property. I want to celebrate Ayda's willingness today to share the depths of her journey in this conversation. You know, where she comes from, allowing you to better appreciate the self-made entrepreneur that she is, but also her life can give permission for you to do the same. So Ayda, thank you. I think this is a big step to actually let people in. So thanks for doing this.
Thanks. It's always hard to sit and listen to someone talk about you like that, but yeah, let's go.
And you know, Ayda, I do that on purpose because I want people to actually breathe it in. It's not a natural thing that we hear our bio or somebody repeat all the things that we've done. And that's actually part of this conversation today, really allowing other people into your life, but also allowing you to know that you've come a long way.
Thank you.
So born in Iran, we talked about that, and you left with your family at 4 years old, and you left for Thailand first. Can you share a memory of that land, of your birth? And look, we all get that you were 4. Possibly it's a story you've heard about your country, but I just want to get a sense of the Iranian culture and what it means to you in your life.
Yeah, so Iran, when we left Iran, the reason we left Iran was because the revolution happened and the Shah, which is the king, got kicked out, and the country went a huge revolution, which basically is what you know it now. So women and men were separated. There was a lot of rules, based around religion, and it was not really a great place to grow up. My brother would have been forced into the army at a very young age. So my parents decided that it would be best for us to leave as soon as possible. We were lucky. We were able to leave, on a plane.
Yes.
But we didn't leave with anything. So we basically had to start a new life. I was only 4. People ask me if I remember anything, and I don't. And I don't actually have many photos of being a baby. Through, asking people, talking to people. So we lived in Bangkok in Thailand, and we were waiting to get visas approved to come to Australia. So I lived in Bangkok for about a year. I think we went 6 months in, or whatever you had to do to go out of the border and come back in. A specific story that I remember from Bangkok is Bangkok markets, and my dad had got some dodgy t-shirt from a stall and was trying to return it, and the lady wouldn't give him his money back, so she took us as hostage, me and my sister. And yeah, it was quite frightening because, like, my dad was coming from a culture where, you don't do that, and it's Asia. Like, we all know now that it's like the dodgy markets, you know. So it was a cultural adjustment, being there. But I just remember how busy it was. Like, we were on motorbikes, so we would be one of those families that was like 4 babies, 4
hanging
kids
off
and
the motorbike.
Sort of thing. I just remember that, and that's kind of my memory of the migration towards Australia. And just I was just scared a lot because I didn't know. It was so busy, the traffic, and so it's just a bit of fear around being in a totally different place and not knowing what's going on. And then we moved to Sydney. And then from Sydney we moved to Brisbane, and then I went back to Sydney, and sort of a bit everywhere now. So that's the history.
And when you describe this moment, I didn't really think much about the fact that you could come with no suitcases, like with nothing.
We had a suitcase.
You had one suitcase.
Yeah, I had a doll.
You had a doll. Okay. Well, I'm thinking about our lives with so much stuff, and it's Christmas time. And how did you grow up with a lot of stuff and Christmas? Like, how did that work in terms of celebrating and birthdays? And did you celebrate Christmas?
Well, I don't remember as a kid celebrating Christmas, but as we grew up, we celebrated Christmas as we became school years. Yeah. We had a Christmas tree and things, like trying to be culturally fitting in. But we lived in like a 1-bedroom apartment. And then, a 2-bedroom apartment. Like, we never had our own rooms. Me and my sister would share. So it was, these tiny little places with not much stuff. Never really had much stuff. I don't, remember having a lot of things. And it's actually really interesting because, I look now personally and think, we have so much stuff, and I throw stuff out, not throw it out, but give it away all the time because I'm like, why do I even need this stuff?
Yeah, and I'm glad you're sharing that, because sometimes I think that lives in you, that sense of, I don't need this much stuff, even though you live in a culture with lots of stuff. Where you come from, it like, there's some imprints, there's some things that you go through that all like really impact you. Yeah. And so talk to me a little bit about whether you were wearing a headscarf when you arrived, and I wonder, like, when you left Iran, was everyone wearing a headscarf, and then you arrive in Australia and all of a sudden you look around and not everyone is, and what's that journey like?
So I do remember wearing the headscarves when we were in Australia because, culturally that was a requirement. Yeah. So, like, when you're enforced something somewhere, it's really hard to be okay with not doing it. Right. And you can see that in Iran now, where people are trying to not do it, and then there's so much judgment, not even by like rules, but even just other people judging, how dare you. So when we came to Australia, we were wearing the headgear. I spent a lot of time with my mum. Yes. And I would go with my mum to English school for her to learn. And we would be catching the bus because we didn't have a car. And we would be going to this bus stop with the headgear, and there would be this one particular bus driver that when the doors would open to that and we'd see it was him, like, I would feel like something, and my mum, I could feel her heart sink. And the reason for that was this bus driver was, you could call him a racist. But he refused to communicate and allow us. So basically he would pretend he didn't know what my mum was trying to do to get on the bus. So we would get, pushed off the bus for this particular bus driver. And that was probably one of the most pivotal moments at, that imprinted, if you want to call it, the rest of my life. Yeah, wow. Because I didn't know what he was saying. I didn't know what my mum was saying, like what was going on, because I'm like 4 or 5 years old. But what I knew is that my mum was ashamed. And in that moment, I had like a feeling that I never want to feel like that. Wow. So I put 2 and 2 together, being communication is being able to speak a language, which means you have to be educated. You see that link?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So for me, education was like how you don't get bullied, how you get accepted, So that was like first imprint into my life.
So then when you're at school, did you see that environment, like school is where this education thing is going to happen, or did you think this was going to come later, this education stuff?
I went to school and I didn't speak English.
Yeah.
And I was like a kid and like trying to figure out what was going on. And I remember everyone was doing the alphabet and I was like, what? And then the kids were pointing to that sticker that's stuck to the table that's got like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Yeah. So that's stuck on the table and I'm like, what? And the kids are like pointing at it and I'm like, as if I can read. I don't even.
Yeah. You're like, that is not helping.
But I learnt mirroring, at school. God. So I just memorized what they were saying and just repeated it.
Which is a language and an education unto itself, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's how I went into school. And then for me, I found reading, which is so weird, maybe not to other people that are like coming from other cultures. I found it much easier for me to pick up reading than speaking, and that because I don't know, I didn't feel like I belonged maybe, and I would just sort of try really hard to like, and then I started reading a lot of books. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And all the while, while you're trying to navigate this whole, I need to be educated in order to be accepted and to belong, and you're trying to learn how to read, all these things are going on. What's happening at your house? What's going on in your family at this time?
So my home life was pretty bad. Like my dad at the time was a heavy alcoholic. So, the home life was pretty violent communication, and, it was just a lot of fighting. So I spent, a lot of my upbringing in that environment, and I also spent my upbringing from going to safe houses. So I never had, I would say I didn't really have stability growing up because we never really felt safe at home. And I'm like listening to myself say this as I'm saying it, and I'm like, shit, I just found another link in my life right now, but I'll get to that.
This is why we do this. Thank you. Well done.
We went from safe house to safe house, and if you don't know what a safe house is, I'll just explain to the listeners. Basically, it's when you're in a domestic violence situation, there's these homes that people have set up, whether it's government or private, that you can go to stay the night or however many days you need until it's deemed safe for you to go home. So me and my sister and brother would and my mum would go to these places. Like I would get picked up from school sometimes in a police car.
Come on.
And taken to a safe house. Now, I don't like, I've never, it took me a long time to talk about this because I never wanted people to have a bad impression of my family or my father. But, people are doing the best they can with the circumstances that they've been dealt. But my dad no longer drinks alcohol anymore, and we have a great relationship. But this is the life that I was born into.
Sure.
That was going on for a very, very long time, very long time. My parents would split, and every time I would get that, I'm separating, I was happy.
Yeah, right.
I would be happy that my dad was leaving.
Yes.
Like, peace, please, can we not have this? And,
Can I just ask quickly, were you afraid just as much as your mom was afraid, or were you afraid for your mom?
I was afraid.
For your own self too.
Yeah. I was afraid for my brother. Like I was never like physically assaulted. Is that the word?
Sure.
I don't know, physically hit or anything, but it was like verbally scary.
Yeah,
but my brother being a boy, it was different.
Got it.
So, my brother probably got the brunt of it, but it was very crazy, very unsafe and unstable growing up. So I don't know, for some reason, like I ended up I was always really scared for my mum in the sense of I never wanted her to feel alone. It wasn't like that. I just, growing up, I always would say no to my friends to do something if I knew my mum was going to be by herself because I never wanted her to feel alone. And I think a lot of people don't realize, and I try to, tell people that have got kids when they're going through family breakups and stuff, I was like, make sure your child doesn't feel guilty for you. you know, because I went through, you know, it's not the split that's the worst. It's feeling that one person's moved on and the other one's by themselves. And then there's this guilt that gets brought up into you as a child. And it was for me the worst, where I became like a parent.
I was going to say you're parenting
I became
her.
a parent. And that's, I don't know, I think it was like 9. That's when the dynamic changed between parent and child. But no one told me to do it. It's just this thing that I became somehow felt so, I was so connected to my mum that I felt her all the time. And like, you know, there is so much more to be said about moving on and being happy and showing your child you're happy rather than like being miserable, down, whatever else is going on. You can't move on. I have to spend all my time with my kids. It's not that. It's really like being an independent person and happy with yourself and showing like that, you know, empowerment you have after that relationship is over. Because, yeah, that was huge for me.
That's a very powerful thing that you're saying there, because you could see that you became like a caretaker for her in such a chaotic situation, which has led you to be a little bit of a caretaker of people. You know, I can see, even we're going to talk about this later, about some of the work that you do, the group that you care about. I can see a bit of this theme sort of like, you know, playing out. And so there's like the good side of caretaking, and then there's the side where you didn't get to be a kid. Yeah. Which in that same vein, how did you think about at 14? I keep just repeating that age, because how can a 14-year-old imagine leaving home? Like, but then again, what is home? You know, you're telling us that it's safe houses and it's a lot of movement. And so tell me a little bit about what it takes to even contemplate leaving at 14.
Yeah. So, you know, obviously growing up, safe houses, my parents split, and then my, you know, mum finally met someone else. And when we'd all moved in together, that person that my mother met had an older son who was very religious. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with religion, but in this situation, there is something wrong when you use religion to torment people. And so he would use religious things to basically call me like a slut. And I was like a child. Yeah. So he would like say things to me. I don't know. He was just an evil, unhappy person, and he was just picking at me. I would do things like clean the house, and then he would go and mess it all up and then make it look like I didn't. Just actual terrorizing stuff. And then I would tell my mum about these things, and she wouldn't believe me because he was religious and he believes and he is like God's, you know. So this went on to the point where it got so bad one day where he was like in my face and he like held me up against the wall with my with my throat, that I was upstairs, my mum and that were downstairs, and I screamed, and my mum and that came upstairs and was like, what the hell? And I was like, this is what happened. This has been happening. I'm telling you, you need to make a decision. I was like, you need to choose them or me. And, you know, my mum just was silent. And so whatever guardian angels and, you know, there was something that possessed me in that moment to just say move. Wow. Like no fear, nothing. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going. And I like just left. And at 14, I found out you can't leave home legally. You have to go into foster care. So I would just stay at friends' places as much as I could. Went and got my first job at Hungry Jack's at 14 so I could save money to move out. Worked my ass off, saved my $7 an hour to have a bond, to be able to buy pots, pans, whatever, you know, like these things that you need to do, and pay my rent. And then at 16, I became my own legal guardian. But that was very hard because my mum pretty much disassociated with me because it's so bad.
So she kept being silent?
She basically said, if you do this, then you're not my daughter. And that's, you know, that's manipulation, but it culturally was the worst thing you could do, to leave home at a young age. It's like I was abandoning my mum, basically. So,
which, let's just revisit this idea that the thing that you cared most about was that she wasn't alone.
Yeah.
and that you were always caring about that. But that moment when she was silent, something in you just clicked over, didn't it?
Yeah.
And you saved yourself. I mean, again, like the courage that it takes to, like, I know in you is a caretaker. So to do that is doubly as hard because you had to say, no, I've got to save myself. This is too chaotic.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so now you're earning your own money. You're actually like surviving your own legal guardian. Is that a legal process when you say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was, so basically what happened is I went to Centrelink and I was like, I need help. I need to get out of the house. They put me on to counselling. The counselling sessions that I did there, then they basically were the ones that said you have to go to foster care. And I was like, no way. I'm like, my house is so bad and all this upbringing. I'm not going into another crazy environment.
Yeah.
So they were like, well, then you can become your legal guardian at 16, but your mum has to agree.
Oh.
And I was like, well, she's not even going to talk to me. But they were like, well, we'll try and get her to a counselling session, blah, blah, blah. So this Centrelink person, which I wish I knew the name because they saved my life.
Wow.
They just kept calling my mum and would not stop. Like my mum was like, nah. And one day she agreed finally. Wow. And we went to this session. I explained everything. Then we had a one-on-one and I don't know what she said, but my mum agreed to sign off. But my mum still didn't talk to me for a period of time after that. So she agreed to sign off. And then I moved out of home into a share home and paid for a room. Went to school. From school, I went to Hungry Jack's. And Hungry Jack's, I'd go home, do my assignments, go to school, repeat.
And okay, there's a couple things I just want to say is like shout out to those people who go the extra mile, you know, literally saved your life.
Yeah.
With your mom, it wouldn't happen if somebody hadn't been knocking on her heart over and over again.
Yeah.
And then tell me about how do you manage paying your rent, working at Hungry Jack's, going to school, and, you know, for you, education's important, so I know you weren't doing it halfway. Were you exhausted? How'd you do this?
Man, I had so much energy. I think I only just became exhausted after COVID, to be honest.
Oh, right. It's only catching up on you now. Okay.
It's the long COVID that's now made me tired. But
yeah, right. Okay.
So, yeah, look, I don't know. I would $7.50 seemed like a lot. I was only paying $80 a week for the room.
Okay.
And I think the cost of living was a lot less than it is now. But I had also received Centrelink living away from home allowance as well. There was like a small allowance. So, you know, I got for other roles. And I'd actually applied for a finance position, which was only commission, and there was no limit to what you could earn. So when this company said there is, I was like, thank you, but no thanks, and went and worked in the other business.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your mind, tell me a little bit from a mindset point of view, what's your mind saying when you hear there's a limit, and what's your mind saying about the unlimited one?
So one was time, because they said they couldn't give me a timeline either. Like I was like, so is it a year? Then I can, be there. And they're like, oh no, you've got to and they put a time frame on how fast I could move as well as how much money I could move. Whereas in the other position, it was like, this is how much you earn, but it's up to you how many clients you get.
Work hard. It's up to you, and I imagine you're doing it. So more money is coming in. The envelopes are getting thicker, possibly. Tell me what you did with your money. Like, what's your spending personality at that time?
So when I was still in school,
like 19-ish, maybe just
we used to
coming out.
hang out at the bus stop. I mean, we didn't have Facebook and Instagram and all that. We used to just go to parties.
Yeah.
Like I was quite a extrovert at a young age, very much. I was the person you contact to see what's on the go.
Oh, hilarious.
So I just had a lot of friends. So we'd catch buses to parties, go to parties, buy your own alcohol.
But could you afford a car? Like, were you buying
I didn't.
a car?
So I saved my money. So all I wanted was a car.
Okay.
So I saved my money for a car. I saved $5,000. And then I went along to car yard shopping.
Yes.
And saw, okay, that's a car, started test driving cars. And then the car dealer dude was like, there was a red Honda Prelude, sunroof. It was beautiful. And I was like, oh, that's the dream. And he was like, take it for a ride. I'm like, I can't, it was $11,000. And I was like, I can't afford that. I've only got 5. He's like, just do it. Salespeople. So I drove it, loved it. And he was like, well, how do you know you can't afford it? And I was like, because I only have $5,000.
Ooh.
And he was like, well, why don't you sit down with the finance guy and see if he can get you the rest?
So interesting.
And I was like, oh, awesome. So at this point, I'm rewinding now. I wasn't in finance. I was just at school.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay. And I was like, cool. And then the guy went through and he basically got me an approval for a very high interest loan at 27%. I knew nothing about loans at this time. And basically the contract to buy the car had said, I can only get out of it if I can't get finance. So there was this trick. So I did get finance, but I didn't want that finance. But I then had to buy the car because they still approved me for finance.
Oh.
Yeah, it was really dodgy back then.
That's tricky.
Really dodgy. Yeah. So I was like, well, I don't want that. It's too high. And he was like, but because of the contract you signed, you have to get the car unless I say you don't get finance. And I was like, what the hell?
Yeah, what just happened?
Yeah. So I ended up getting the car, and that is the beginning of my bad money time.
Got it. So,
Yeah.
So something. Okay. What do you mean when you say bad?
So that was the beginning of getting into a bad financial position. And that's why I do understand when people are in a rut with money. I was very young. I was paying 27%. The loan was never going anywhere. So it was a high loan repayment. Then I got a credit card for $1,000 limit that the bank used to just send you. I'm just thinking all of these things
Coming back
now,
to you, isn't it?
that is so different, regulation wise. But
Sure.
the bank would have sent you a pre-approved card. Do you want it? And with the card back in the day, I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah, I think I remember
And
this.
I think there's all these rules have changed now. They can't just, and obviously if you activate it, you've said yes. So I took the card. I didn't know anything about money. And, I was like, I need to get these shoes. I'm good with money. I'll just pay it off after.
I earn money.
That was fine. But then I had a car accident in this car. And
Oh my God.
the people that saw the accident called the ambulance, and back then the ambulance wasn't free. So I was stuck with a $3,500 bill, which I had to use my credit card for. So now my credit card's like $5,000. So yeah, all of these random things happened that cost me. And so this is where, you know, things happen that are outside of your control.
Exactly.
And you get into debt for. So I totally feel for people that have had things happen or money taken from them or tricked into something.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, it's your responsibility. So I just was not really getting anywhere. And at this point, going from having cash
Yes.
and saving and being good, and then having debt and not knowing what to do was a pretty hard place to be. And that's where I started to like really get that interest in understanding contracts, understanding money. So when I took this position at the company where I was teaching people about money, so I was teaching people about cash flow, money management, how to own your assets, I had already got myself out of that debt. So that's when, prior to that, I went and got a personal loan. Yeah, all of these things by asking questions. There wasn't really Google much around yet in that scope of things. It hadn't taken off. So I did that, got myself out, and then that was where I was really interested in helping other people with finances.
And the last question on this is, I can really feel this moment where you were transitioning from your envelopes, because that moment where you got that finance, the envelope conversation shifted. And because you were so open to ask people questions, you were reading, you were curious, you upped your game. What was it? So was it a quick shift from being in the debt and all those learnings to actually feeling like you were growing some wealth?
Quick, it probably felt like forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like
it
2
was
years,
just a
or?
really hard. So I was like 17 and then like 18. You know, I bought my first property when I was like 19. So
Okay.
there was probably probably a year. But I was then working, earning commission, which was a lot more than Hungry
Sure.
Jack's or when I was at Subway. So I was now